I'm just going to talk about charities and how to set up one. This is not legal advice, and I'm not doing this from a perspective of looking into detail in terms of the Act the way Ms. Coogan has done. I just want to kind of set out certain practical parameters that, you know, if you were interested in setting up a charity, that you should pay attention to. I bet some of you are wondering why we've got a charities talk in the middle of a business company law session. But in my view, I think that both things kind of interchange in society, that you've got business and you've got charities, and we need charities, and do indeed businesses support charities, and charities are an essential part of any community. So I will get on with it. Just to say from a background of, should I say, from the Pre-Charities Act point of view, before now there were two legislations, the Charities Act of 1961 and 73. Both very small, tiny legislations in comparison to the Charities Act of 2009, and both didn't deal with a lot of issues that are dealt with in the 2009 Act. There was an attitude of soft regulation, no formal registry for charities, no regulatory authority, no proper rules on submissions of annual returns, or what we now call a statement of accounts, no proper rules for fundraising. Now, the Charities Act 61 and 73 do talk about these things, but not to an extent or to an appreciable level as the 2009 Act has done. So basically what the 2009 Act has done, just like the Companies Act of 2014, is consolidated as well as far-reaching, and has dealt with a lot of things that have never been at all fathomed or dealt with before now in the history of the state. So, came into effect on the 29th of, or enacted rather, on the 29th of February 2009. Most of the Act came into effect pretty much immediately. Some of them came in later on by statutory instruments, but at this stage now they're all in operation. I'm just going to deal here now with the main implications of the Act. The Act set up a Charities Regulatory Authority, which is one-stop shop. This body now regulates charities in Ireland, and that all charities have to be included in the register. So there's a register maintained by the body. All charities have to be in that. Makes it a criminal offence to describe yourself as a charity if you're not registered. Discretion to reduce the amount of paperwork, because at the moment, with the revenue, or I should say as a matter of background, what used to happen before the 2009 Charities Act was if you wanted to set up a charity, one, you didn't necessarily have to be registered with anyone, but the revenue commissioners had a small department that was looking after the registry. But it wasn't a registry per se, because it wasn't extremely compulsory, save if you were looking for tax exemptions or incentives, and you'd register and they give you a CHY number. And that CHY number would go on your letterhead, and you'd then say that you're registered, but it wasn't really a registry in that sense. So with this Act now comes this compulsory registration. There's no authentic entitlement to tax reliefs. However, you can obviously apply to revenue commissioners for that status. Does not recognise human rights as a charitable activity, and I think a lot of people in the public are under the impression that, you know, if you're a human rights organisation, maybe you fall, but clearly the legislation doesn't provide for that, and indeed the revenue commissioners weren't given tax incentives to charities. Obviously you have the likes of Amnesty International, who would have some sort of a status even before you know, some of this legislation came in, and because they were doing other things, not just human rights, that would have charitable status. Annual reports being compulsory, you know, under this new legislation, and companies limited by guarantee will file a return, usually to the CRO, but the CRO would then in turn file those papers then, just to prevent a dualisation of filing of papers. Other implications are that charities will have to show the name and collection boxes. I think there's been a lot of controversy in the last few years in terms of fundraising for charities, and indeed, you know, that the money going to the right place. So there's new regulations now in terms of collection. So when you're collecting, be it on the street or you've got a box in a shop collecting money for charities, it has to be very clear from the inception what the charity is, who they are, and indeed from now they'll also have to have a number to say that they are registered, which members of the public can check just if you're in doubt. Because there is also the risk of people who are collecting just for themselves under the guise of a charity. And then there are more regulations, and I won't go into them in too much detail, but there's a 3-step approach now, that there's a Garda permit that is required. So you'd have to go to your local Gardaí and say, look, we're going to be collecting in such and such a place, or on O'Connell Street on the blank day of blank. And then there's a conduct, a requirement, which is a conduct that's going to be applicable to people collecting. And then the details of the fundraising activity has to go into your returns then to the charities registration or regulatory authority then at the end of the fiscal year, as the case may be. Other implications are that charities can remunerate trustees. There's always been a controversy about that, but under this Act, trustees can be paid, however, not for their functions as trustees. So one has to be careful. They have to be doing other things outside of their ordinary, everyday trustee obligations, so they could be paid for that. So for example, if they were, just for argument's sake, if it was St. Vincent de Paul and maybe a trustee was involved in, I don't know, visiting people in their home to see what need or help that they need, that it could be paid for his time in terms of doing that. So that's that, and that the High Court can grant relief for personal liability where trustees or where a trustee has acted in good faith. So this is obviously a power that the High Court has been given jurisdiction in that regard under the Act. And then, of course, this I find very, very welcomed and impressive, that we now have a Charities Appeals Tribunal, and I'll be dealing with that momentarily. But so you want to set up a charity. What is a charity? I think that's a fantastic place to start. Organisations that have that are exclusively charitable, have exclusive charitable purposes, and who benefit the public at large is what a charity is. And in terms of kind of looking at it and qualifying those, these are the 4 categories. These existed even before the Act, but they've now been set out again in the Act, which is that it has to be for the advancement of education, advancement of religion, prevention of poverty or poverty alleviation, and any other purpose that is of benefit to community. Now, this last category is very, very controversial, and I was personally aware of cases where, before the Act came in, people who had applied to the Revenue Commissioners looking for tax exemptions, and then the Revenue turns around and says, no, you're not a charity. And there's often a lot of argument back and forth as to what this category is, because people doing all sorts of things would want to be qualified under that category. The other 3 are quite obvious and straightforward enough. And just to set that out, and the Act actually goes into it in detail, which is great, which is very helpful. So it says the advancement of community welfare, the advancement of community development, promotion of civic responsibility. There are other things such as, prevention, natural environment, religious, racial harmony. So anything really that benefits society, and there are health ones as well that will fall under charities. Sickle cell. I know that. Say for example, sickle cell people would qualify under that, and they'll have a charity that will have tax exemptions. So that's what that particular category encompasses. So it's quite wide and it's quite big. However, it still does not include things like human rights and so on and so forth. So one would need to look at the Act in detail if you were thinking of setting up something to make sure that you do qualify. Otherwise, you're back into the remit of company law, and you're not a charity, so you might as well get on with it, So starting your own charity, these are obvious things, but I think it's important that one begins to think about them. You have to decide what is the purpose, and that's what I've just dealt with in the previous slide. What are you going to be doing? Does it really qualify as a charity, or should it be something else? And decide on a name. That's quite obvious, but with the new regulatory body, the charities regulator, he's going to check, just like the Company Registrations Office, he's going to check, does this name exist already, or is there something similar? Is there going to be a confusion? And if there is, just for the sake of the name, that particular charity will not be registered. I think it's important to seek advice, and oftentimes for charities, money is always an issue, and they're looking to cut costs, but as we've heard by other speakers, there are many places one could go to now to get advice, including Citizens Information, the likes of the Wheel, and so many other organisations dealing with this type of situation. So it's important, get advice where and if you can. The other thing that I think people should do, the obvious thing is get on with it. If you are a charity or you want to become a charity, start the work. Now, it's a criminal offence to say you are a charity when you're not registered, but you can get on with the actual work. So, for example, you want to feed the elderly women in your neighbourhood because they're all hungry. So say that's what you want to do. Get out there and try it a few times, and make sure, for example, that it is indeed benefiting society, that people do need it. It's not just some sort of white elephant project that isn't going to be of benefit to anyone. Get out there and actually do it. Get people together, see what you can do, see that it is viable and it is something that is needed in your community. Then the other important thing is decide on the legal structure of the charity. And again, this is in the remit of company law. I have to apologise, some of these slides were prepared before the legislation came in, and I'm so glad that Tara has very helpfully set out what the new position is. So essentially before now there were three positions that one could take from a legal structure basis. That you could either go with a company limited by guarantee, you could go with an unincorporated body, or you could just go with a charitable trust, which is you set up a trust, and usually the instrument would be, you set up a trust instrument, and that's your constitutional, or should I say, that would be some sort of your memorandum articles of association if you were setting up a company similar to it or akin. So here, I'm looking at just most charities are companies limited by guarantee. I don't know what's going to happen, say by I think it's October, is it, of next year, November rather, where they're going to fall into. Some of them may remain as they are. Others may well go into designated activity companies if they have a specific function, even as a charity. We'll wait and see. But at the moment, 71% of charities are registered as companies limited by guarantee, and again, that's managed, or should I say, that's regulated by the by company law, or the company, the CROs, rather, the company registrations office. So when it comes to your returns, those returns go to the company registrations office. But if you're also a charity, then they take it upon themselves to forward those returns then to the regulatory authority. So that's set out in the Act as well. So. And then this is the second one, which is just where you're setting up a charitable trust, and quite common as well, but obviously not as common as companies. And this works for, say foundations or things like that. Just to be very clear with this, it's not about setting up a, trust for 3 of your children and hoping that would get some sort of tax incentive or to fit it in under the or to look at it almost as a charity, but no, that doesn't qualify it. But so it's important to know that this kind of trusts are for specific purposes. Then this is common as well. A lot of religious bodies will have this kind of status, which is an unincorporated association with the constitutional rules. These are for much smaller organisations. Some big organisations are, go with that platform as well. But it's important to think, before you start a charity, what kind of platform do I want? And as Tara pointed out earlier on, each one would have different advantages in terms of, what your liabilities are personally and what your liabilities are to the company. Obligations are rather, to the CRO, so on and so forth. This is a small chart. Of course, this is now out of date, but I think it's helpful insofar as types of legal structure and the governing instruments. So you need to know what instruments you need in order to set up the charity, or to set up the body. So if it's going to be a company limited by guarantee, you know that you need a memorandum of articles of association, which we now call the constitution, which is going to change. But essentially the bones of it will be the same. So you're talking about directors, names and address of directors, a few secretaries, so on and so forth. And if it's an unincorporated association, you need a constitutional rules. And if it's a charitable, if it's a trust, then you need your trust deeds or trust instruments, as the case may be. So in terms of starting a charitable organisation, I'm just saying here that you need to begin to think of trustees as well, because you need, people who are going to actually stand behind the charity when you do register it, and to be able to carry out the activity. and as I said, you've got to be registered, but there's nothing stopping you from getting out there and doing it. It's just that you can't tell people I'm a charity. That's the offence. But you can do the charitable work is always welcome. Wherever it is you want to establish it. Now, when you're setting up, each organisation or each charity must provide all of this detail. So the details, bank accounts. Obviously, if you haven't started yet, you don't go into things like that. But as I say, once you start and you begin to, if you are investing your own money into it, and I shouldn't call it an investment because it's a charity and it's not for profit, and there's no, you're doing it simply for the benefit of society. But these are the things that the charities regulatory authority will be looking for. Details of bank statement for the charity, how it proposes to raise money, how much it raises in a year. This is for charities that have operated before. I should say to you as well that all the charities that existed before the charities regulatory body came into existence are all going to be absorbed by the regulator. So the regulator is simply going to take the list from from the revenue commissioners, and all the companies that have had exemptions before, or charities, whether limited by guarantee or just trust or whatever, would all be taken over and automatically would go on to it be included in the list of registry of charities. But then the new applicants would have to provide all of this information as I've set out there. If you're successful in your application, your obligations are that you must cooperate with the authority at all times. The legislation allows the authority to appoint inspectors. Those inspectors can turn up to see what charitable work you're doing, to see how you're raising your money, to make sure that you're complying with the legislation. So it's important at all times. There is an obligation under the Act for you to cooperate with them. You have to keep proper books and accounts. Those books and accounts have to be submitted then, as I was saying earlier on. And indeed, if you're a company limited by guarantee and a charity, then it goes to the company registrations office, who would in turn send it on to the regulatory authority. So you have an obligation to inform the authority of any material change in your circumstance, because what often happens is people might begin to deviate at some point from purely charitable functions into maybe doing other things. And many organisations have been caught in that situation where they're bordering on profit or beginning to do things that are more company orientated rather than charity orientated. And so it's important that if you're in doubt, inform the regulatory body immediately that, look, this is what's going on. They will straight away advise you one way or another if you are out of the remit of a charity. If your application is refused, it's fantastic to know that you can appeal it. Before now, if the revenue commissioner says, look, we're not giving you a CHY number and we're not giving you any incentive or exemptions in your tax as a charity, there was no recourse and you were left high and dry, and that was it. However, there was soft regulations, so there were charities out there who weren't really registered or who didn't have any tax exemption but still went out, collected money and did everything else, whereas now that's a criminal offence. But then it's welcome that you can appeal that to the Charities Appeals Tribunal, which is going to take applications like, I was refused being registered as a charity, or I've been penalised by the regulatory authority. They've taken my charity off the list because of some irregularity. All that can now be appealed to the Charities Appeals Tribunal. And obviously you can reapply as many times as you want. So you can apply today. If the regulator says no, tomorrow morning you can put in a new application. If it says no, you can put in, so there's no restriction on the number of applications. So that's another option for you. If you're refused, you can, try amend what the problem is and try again. Under the Act, there's an obligation on the regulator to tell you what it is that is wrong with your application. So there must be a reason. As a fair procedure, as natural justice point, that there must be a reason for the refusal. So obviously you can deal with that and then reapply as many times once you've addressed the particular issue. It's important as well to reevaluate your application. Those two feed into each other, and apply again. Okay, so I think that's it. The only other thing that one might say is just in terms of information, and I think this is the bare bones. This is, scaling it down to the bare bones of the stuff in the Act. It's quite a big Act. Now, obviously, it's nowhere near it's nowhere near the Companies Act, but it is quite a big legislation. And I think Tara did a fantastic job the way she's presented it, but I've tried to stay away from that because I thought I'll just put it down to the bare bones as to what you need in order to, and how to move you forward. So I think just before I finish, just to say, in terms of information, so you've got you can, and maybe it's important for you to read the actual act. So, and if you do, statute, yeah, it's recommended. Yeah. So, get a copy of the actual act. You can get that on statute. Well, it's online. I like to go to oireachtas.ie. Many of my colleagues don't like it. Most people, I think, prefer statutebooks.ie, but it's a matter of choice. Those two are very good for reading the actual act. Now, I have to say, I was looking just in preparation for today, I was looking at the website of the Charities Regulatory Authority, and I thought it was reasonably good. I think it's developing. They still have a bit more work to do, but it's quite good because it tells you exactly what you need for your application. It tells you what a charity is. It gives you the bare definitions of all the things that you require and what their powers are. And I think a copy of the Act, as far as I know, is on that website as well. So those are very important resources that you can get online. But again, the things, get out there, get doing something. If you're, it's not like a business, not like a company. If there's something out there you need, that you think society needs, and you think that you want to go down that road, it's no point waiting. Get out there, and even in the course of doing that, then you'll find out very quickly if it is indeed a need. Unless you've got any questions, I think. Thank you.